The children ask me the same question every cycle when the long dark between systems gets into them and they need a voice older than the hull to fill it. They ask why we have no home, not where it is, not how far. They are too young to believe in a place they have never stood on, so they do not ask for a direction. They ask for a reason. They want to know what we did. I am old enough to tell them, and I am the last who tended the record, so it falls to me. I was a Ledgerward of the Quorum Reach. For 310 of our years I kept the accounts of what was owed to us and what we were owed, and I will tell you now, before I tell you anything else, that the accounting was the disease. A people who measure everything they are owed will eventually go and collect it. That is the whole of the lesson, and the rest is only the size of the bill. So sit, bank the lamps low the way the convoy likes it, so the children at the back can see the stars through the long ports and pretend the stars are close. They are not close. Nothing is close anymore. That is part of the answer too. We were great people once. I do not say this to make you proud. Pride is what I am warning you against, and a warning that begins with pride is at least honest. But it is true, and you should know what we were so you can measure what we are. The Quorum Reach spanned 11 sovereign systems and held tributary rights over 30 more. We did not build the largest fleets in the arm, and we were not the oldest people, and we were not the most feared, though we believed for a long while that we were all three. We built ledgers. We built the law of debts. When two peoples could not agree on what one owed the other, they came to the Reach and we weighed it, and our weighing was honored from the Syndral drift to the edge of the charted deep, because a quorum accounting was held to be incorruptible. We were the bookkeepers of the galaxy, and the bookkeepers grow rich, and the rich grow certain, and the certain forget that there is anyone above the ledger. I tell you this because you need to understand the shape of our arrogance before you can understand the shape of our fall. We were not conquerors. We did not sweep into other systems with our guns lit, demanding worlds. That was not the quorum way, and we held ourselves superior to the peoples who did it. We were collectors. We took only what was owed, only what the law of debts said was ours, and we took it with documents and seals and a clerk's calm, and we called this civilization. The peoples whose homes we hollowed out for unpaid tribute did not call it civilization. But they did not keep the ledgers, so their word did not weigh. Now the hearth. You have heard the word from your mothers, the way you hear a curse half swallowed before it is finished. The hearth was a vessel. I will not pretend I can describe it as it was, because I never stood close enough to it to learn its weight, and by the time it mattered to me, it was already a wound in the record rather than an object on a shelf. But I can tell you what we believed about it. And what we believed is the only part that ever moved anything. We believed the hearth was the cradle of the first quorum flame. Our oldest tellings, older than the ledgers, older than the law, said that our people did not learn fire but were given it, in a vessel, by hands the tellings did not name. The vessel was the hearth. From it the first hearth of the first holdfast was lit, and from that hearth every other, down the long braid of generations to the lamps you are sitting under now. The hearth was the origin of us. It was the thing that made us a people and not a scatter of animals freezing on a dark world. You understand what I am saying. It was not treasure. Treasure can be lost and mourned and forgotten. The hearth was identity. To a people who kept the accounts of all the galaxy, it was the one entry that could never be balanced, because it was the entry from which all the others descended. And it was not in our keeping. That is the part the children always stop me on, and I do not blame them, because it stopped me too when I first read it in the deep record, long before I understood what it would cost to undo. The hearth had not been in quorum hands for a span longer than the Reach itself had existed. The tellings disagreed on how it left us. Some said it was carried off in a war so old it had rotted out of the ledgers entirely. Some said it was given away by a holdfast lord in a bargain whose terms had been struck from the record by shame. Some said, and these were the tellings the priests preferred, that it had never truly been ours to begin with, that we had only been its keepers for a season, and that the season had ended, and that it had passed on the way a flame passes from one wick to the next. But all the tellings agreed on where it had gone. It had gone to the humans. I felt the room change when I said the word, even now, even here, even with all of us already ruined. Good. Hold on to that. The word should change the room. There was a time it did not for us, and that time is the reason we are out here in the dark with no world under us, telling the young why. You must understand how the humans sat in the galaxy's mind in those years, because it was not as they sit now in ours. Now we speak of them in the low voice, the swallowed voice, the way you would speak of a thing that might hear its name. But the reach at its height did not speak of them in that voice. To us, in those years, the humans were a margin, a blank. There were sectors of the chart that simply stopped, edged in the old cartographer's hatching that meant do not enter. And beyond the hatching was a region the deep surveys had given up on, and we knew that region was theirs, and we knew there were old cautions attached to it, and we filed the cautions the way a wealthy people files an inconvenient law. We knew them, and we did not heed them, because heeding them cost us nothing as long as we did not go, and we had no reason to go. There were stories, of course. There are always stories at the edge of a blank. The other peoples of the arm carried the old dread of human space the way they carried any inheritance, without examining it, because examining an inheritance is how you discover it is worthless or worse. The Syndrel kept it as a children's rhyme about ships that sail out and do not sail back. The old Veilkin of the deep would not name the humans at all but had a gesture for them, a closing of the hand, and would make the gesture and say no more. The eldest peoples, the ones who were charting the arm before the quorum had even discovered fire by their own telling, before the hearth, those peoples did not laugh at the rhyme and did not make the gesture. They simply did not go. When you asked them why, they gave you an answer that was not an answer, the way the very old give you a silence dressed as a sentence. They would say, nothing is taken from the humans, and if you pressed them and we pressed them, the reach pressed everyone. That was our nature, they would not explain. They would only say it again, slower, as if the slowness were the explanation. Nothing is taken from the humans. We heard that. I want to be honest with you. It was not that the warning never reached us. It reached us. It was filed. I have read the filing with my own eyes in the deep record in the hand of a Ledgerward 400 years dead, and beside the old people's warning he had written in the dry margin hand we were all trained in, a single notation, unquantified. That is what he wrote beside the warning that should have saved us, unquantified, meaning it could not be entered, it had no figure attached. It named no fleet, no weapon, no count of the dead. It was a dread with no number, and a people who believed only in numbers had no column to put it in, and so it went into the margin, and the margin is where things go to be forgotten. That is how a great people dies, children, not in a battle, in a margin. So, we knew where the hearth was. We knew it was held somewhere in the human margin, in one of the quiet keeps the humans set along the edge of their space. Way houses, the old surveys called them, though no survey had ever gotten close enough to learn what they were for. We knew the humans held the cradle of our flame, the origin of us, the one entry that could not be balanced. And there came a generation of the reach, my generation. I will not hide behind the dead. That decided the entry would be balanced after all. You have to understand it was not greed. I have had a long time out here to be honest, and the easy story is greed and the easy story is a lie. It was worse than greed. It was righteousness. The argument that carried the Holdfast Council, the argument I myself helped to draft, the argument I am ashamed of in a way that does not lessen with the years, was a clean one. It went, we are the people of the ledger. We weigh what is owed. And here is an entry, the oldest entry, the root of every other, and it has sat unbalanced for the whole life of the reach because we were too weak or too distracted or too afraid to collect it. The humans hold what is ours. Our own law, the law the whole arm honors, says a held thing must be returned to its rightful holder upon demand. We have only to make the demand. We have only to go and collect what is owed. And someone, I remember the chamber, I remember the cold blue light of it, I remember which seat he spoke from, someone raised the old people's warning. Nothing is taken from the humans. He raised it not as a believer but as a clerk, the way you raise a clause to be sure it had been addressed. And the answer the chamber gave him, the answer I did not contest, the answer I have replayed more times than there are stars in this port, was this: we are not taking from the humans. We are taking back what is ours. The law is on our side. The ledger is on our side. They are merely holding it. There is no theft where there is a rightful claim. You see the trap. I did not see it then. We had spent so long being the people who decided what was owed that we had forgotten the only question that ever mattered was not whether the claim was just, but whether the one you were collecting from agreed to be collected from. We thought the law was a thing that existed above all peoples, a thing we administered. We did not understand that the law was only a thing the arm honored because the reach was strong enough to make it honored, and that there was a people in the margin who had never signed it, never honored it, never once in the whole history of the chart submitted a debt to our weighing, and that to them our law was not above them. It was nothing. It was a sound we made. The expedition was called a reclamation. Even the word was a clerk's word, a word that filed the act before it was done. We did not send a war fleet because we were collectors, not conquerors, and we genuinely believed, you must hold on to how genuinely we believed it, that we were not going to fight anyone. We were going to present a claim. We sent a reclamation flotilla. 9 vessels, the finest of the reach, hulls inlaid with the seals of the 11 systems, and aboard them the high Ledgerwards and the seal-bearers and the keepers of the law, and a guard, yes, a guard, but a guard of the kind you bring to an unruly debtor, not the kind you bring to a war. I was not aboard. I want that on the record, not because it absolves me, it does not, I drafted the argument that launched them, but because it is the reason I am alive to speak, and you should know that the only quorum who lived are the ones who, by the accident of their duties, were not where the reach was when the answer came. Remember that. It is the cold heart of the whole telling. We did not survive because we were wise. We survived because we were elsewhere. I had the record of the flotilla's crossing relayed to me, as Ledgerward, in the long dispatches they sent back at each stage, and I read them as they came, and I will give them to you now the way I received them, because the shape of them is the shape of the dread, and you should feel the dread build the way we should have felt it and did not. The first dispatches were ordinary. They had crossed the hatched edge of the chart, the old do not enter, and they reported it the way you report passing a customs buoy. The cautions they wrote appeared to be superstition. There were no patrols. There were no challenges. The space beyond the margin was not a fortress bristling with guns, as the rhymes implied. It was quiet. It was, the senior seal-bearer wrote in a phrase I have never been able to put down, unnervingly tended. He did not mean fortified. He meant kept. He meant that the human margin had the feeling of a thing that was looked after, buoys that still functioned, lanes that were still swept, old wrecks that had been moved aside and marked rather than left to drift, and that this was somehow worse than finding it abandoned, because abandonment would have meant the humans were gone, and tended meant they were simply not bothering to be seen. The second set of dispatches carried the first note of unease, though they were too proud to call it that. The flotilla had been hailed, not challenged, hailed. A single transmission from no source they could fix in the trade can of the arm, which meant the humans had bothered to learn the language we collected debts in. The message was short. The seal-bearer transcribed it in full, and I have it by heart, and I will give it to you in full, because every word of it was a door we walked through thinking it was a courtesy. It said, "You are welcome to the Wayhouse at the Sunding Reach. The keeper has been told you are coming. Take what you have come for. We ask only that you understand what you are taking." You hear it, of course you hear it now. We are sitting in the wreck of having not heard it, but put yourself in that chamber, in that flotilla, in that pride. What did they hear? They heard surrender. They heard a weak people, a margin people, a people without a proper fleet conceding the claim before it was even formally pressed. Take what you have come for. To the Ledgerwards aboard that flotilla, that sentence was a debtor opening his strong room. They did not hear the second part. We ask only that you understand what you are taking. They filed it. I can see the filing in the dispatch. Beside the human message the seal bearer had written, condition appears rhetorical, no enforcement noted. Unquantified again, always unquantified. The humans had told us, plainly, in our own collector's cant, that the only thing they required was understanding, and a people who could not enter understanding into a column dismissed the only term of the only contract that would ever have saved them. The Sunting Reach, I have spelled it 9 ways in my mind and never settled because we only ever had it from the humans, and the humans gave it to us once and never again, was a way house at the deep edge of their margin, a station of a kind our surveys had no model for. The flotilla approached it expecting a fortress or a vault, something that would resist them, something a guard would be needed for. They found neither. The dispatches describe a structure that did not read to our instruments as a military thing at all. It was large and it was old, far older than the Reach, and it was, again, that terrible word tended. There was no fleet around it. There was a keeper. One. The dispatches are emphatic and slightly affronted on this point, as if the humans had insulted the flotilla by sending one keeper to receive 9 vessels of the Reach. One keeper who hailed them and let them dock, and did not resist, and did not negotiate, and led the high Ledgerwards to a chamber in the heart of the Way House, where the Hearth had been kept for longer than our records ran. I have wondered out here in the dark with nothing to do but wonder what that keeper's face looked like, whether it was old or young, whether it carried fear or contempt or nothing at all. We never learned. The dispatches do not describe the keeper as a person, only as a function, because to the Ledgewards a single unarmed human standing between them and the cradle of their flame was not a person, was barely an obstacle, was a clerk to be processed. I have wondered whether the keeper knew. Whether they stood in that chamber and watched the seal-bearers approach the hearth, and felt the same thing the old Veilkin felt when they closed their hand and would not speak. I think they did. I think the keeper knew exactly what was being done and exactly what would answer it. And I think the keeper let it happen anyway, because the keeper understood the one thing we did not, that the answer was not the keeper's to give or withhold. The answer was already loaded into the act. The keeper only had to open the door. And the keeper opened the door. The dispatch describing the taking of the hearth is short, and I think it is short because the moment did not feel, to those who lived it, like the great moment of the Reach. It felt like the conclusion of a transaction. They had come to collect what was owed. They collected it. The keeper raised no further objection. The seals were affixed. The hearth was carried aboard the flagship of the flotilla under the 11 seals, and the flotilla undocked and the Way House dwindled behind them, still tended, still quiet, still watched over by its one keeper who did not pursue, because the humans did not pursue because, and this is the thing the whole galaxy knew and we had filed under superstition, the humans never pursue. Nothing is taken from the humans. The old peoples had not meant that the humans guard their possessions well. They had meant that there is no such act as taking from the humans, because a taking implies a thing removed and a loss sustained, and the humans in their margin, in their tended quiet, did not experience our reclamation as a loss. They experienced it as a delivery. We thought we were collecting a debt. We were accepting one. The flotilla came home. I was in the high record keep of the homeworld when they made the crossing back through the hatched edge of the chart, back into the arm, back into the honored space where the law of debts ran and the Reach was strong and the hearth, the cradle of our flame, the unbalanceable entry, was finally, after the whole life of our people, in quorum hands. I will not lie to you about what that was. It was joy. The homeworld lit every hearth at once. The holdfasts that had stood dark in mourning for the lost origin since before the Reach was a Reach burned bright for the first time in their long history. The high Ledgerwards drafted the entry, I drafted it, my hand, the final notation in the oldest account, the one that closed the unbalanceable column at last, and we entered it as paid. The hearth recovered. Debt discharged. We had done what no generation of the Reach had dared. We had collected from the humans, and we had come home, and nothing had answered, and the silence of the margin behind us we read as the silence of a debtor who has paid and has nothing more to say. The humans did not raise a fleet. I want you to understand that they never raised a fleet. There is no fleet in this telling. There is no battle. The children always wait at this part for the war, and I have to tell them there was no war, and they do not believe me, because they have grown up out here in the dark and they assume that to lose a homeworld a people must lose a war. We did not lose a war. We were never given the dignity of a war. A war is a contest between two peoples who have agreed, by fighting, that the other exists. The humans never agreed that we existed in that way. They did not fight us any more than the deep fights a ship that opens its own hull. What they did was return the Hearth. I need to slow here, because this is the part the record cannot fully hold, and I will not pretend to a certainty I do not have. I have spent my long exile trying to assemble what happened from the fragments that reached the convoy, from the last dispatches, from the silent-shaped hole where the homeworld used to send. And I will give you what I have, and I will tell you plainly where the giving stops and the not knowing begins, because a Ledgerward who fills an empty column with invention is the worst kind, and I have been the worst kind once and will not be it again. It began, as these things do, with a courtesy. A transmission reached the homeworld some 40 days after the flotilla's return from beyond the hatched edge, the same untraceable source, the same trade camp, the same calm. The high record logged it, and I read the log within the hour, and at the time I read it as a small strange thing, an afterthought, the last administrative tidying of a closed account. The message said, "You took the Hearth from our keeping. By your own law a held thing is returned to its rightful holder. We have reviewed your law. We find it just. We are returning what is yours." We read it as a concession. Can you understand that? We read it as the humans, having lost the Hearth, formally acknowledging that the Hearth had been ours all along, a debtor not merely paying but conceding the justice of the claim, the highest honor one people can pay another's law. The chamber I sat in took it as vindication. The reach had been right. The law was above even the humans. We had administered the law correctly, and the humans, the margin, the blank, had bowed to it. It was only a few of us, and I was not among them, I confess that too, who heard the other thing in the message. We are returning what is yours. The Hearth was already ours. It was on the homeworld, under the 11 seals in the deepest holdfast. There was nothing left to return. So what was the message announcing the return of? The flotilla that had taken the Hearth was the finest of the reach, and it had crossed into human space and crossed back out and never once been touched. The thing the humans sent did not come as a flotilla. It came as a single object, an envoy craft, unarmed, unmarked, moving slowly and openly along the very lanes our reclamation had used, broadcasting its course and its cargo to every buoy in the arm so that there could be no claim ever that it had come in secret. It announced itself at every stage. It asked permission to approach the homeworld, and by our own law, the law we had built our pride on, we could not refuse the return of a held thing to its rightful holder. They had read our law. They were keeping it. They were keeping it more perfectly than we ever had, and our law required us to open the way and let the envoy come home. The last clean dispatches from the homeworld are administrative. That is the part I cannot get out of my mind. They are not panicked. There was no panic because there was no visible threat, only a single small craft, returning to us a thing we already had, in perfect accordance with a law we had taught the whole arm to honor. The high record logged the envoy's approach the way it logged a tribute barge. It noted the craft's arrival in the homeworld's near space. It noted the opening of the receiving port. It noted in the dry margin hand that the envoy carried a vessel, and that the vessel appeared, and here the hand falters. Here even 400 years of the dry hand falters, to be the Hearth. To be the Hearth. The Hearth that was already on the homeworld, under the 11 seals in the deepest holdfast. There were two now. Or there was one, and it was in two places. Or the one in the holdfast had never been the Hearth, and this was, and the keeper of the wayhouse had given us a true thing wearing the shape of a false one, and the false one had been the thing we had revered for the whole life of the Reach. The record does not say, because the people who would have entered it into the record were on the homeworld, and after that final notation, the homeworld did not send again. That is where the record stops. I want you to feel it stop the way I felt it stop, sitting in the high record keep of the convoy's flagship, watching the relay where the homeworld's dispatches came in, the relay that had pulsed with the traffic of 11 systems every moment of my life. It did not go dark with an alarm. It did not flare and fail. It simply, between one pulse and the next, had nothing in it. The way a voice stops when the speaker has finished, not when the speaker is interrupted. The homeworld did not cry out. The homeworld concluded. We sent. Of course we sent. The convoy was a survey and tithe rotation, far out along the Syndral drift on the Reach's lawful business, the dull duty that was the only reason any of us are breathing, and when the homeworld fell silent, we turned for home with everything the engines had. It took us a long while to cross back, long enough to send 100 queries into the silence and receive 100 silences back. Long enough for the other rotations, the other ships that had been elsewhere, to converge on the same silence and find each other in it, until the scattered fragments of the Reach that had not been home were all turning home together, 100-odd vessels out of the thousands the Reach had launched, calling into a whole. We did not reach the homeworld. I will tell you plainly because the children always ask whether we saw it, whether there was a ruin, a scar, a wound we could point to and say that is where we were. There was nothing to see. We were still far out when the eldest among us, an old shipmaster of the Veilkin who had attached herself to our convoy in the early confusion, made the closing gesture with her hand, the gesture for the humans, the one I told you about, the one I had filed under superstition, and would not let us go on. She did not forbid us with authority she did not have. She simply made the gesture and would not take her hand from it, and one by one the shipmasters of the convoy saw her do it, and one by one they cut their drives. We had spent our whole history not heeding that gesture. We heeded it then. It was the first wise thing the quorum did in the whole telling, and we did it far too late to be any use, and we did it only because an alien older than our flame showed us how. What did the humans do to the homeworld? I do not know. I have told you I do not know, and I will not invent it for you, because the inventing is its own kind of theft. I can tell you only the shape of the not knowing, and the shape is this. The humans never came. No fleet crossed the hatched edge to make war on the Reach. No weapon was fired that any buoy in the arm recorded, and the buoys recorded everything because the humans had announced everything, had broadcast every stage, had been more lawful, more open, more correct than we had ever been. The whole arm watched a single unarmed envoy carry a held thing home to its rightful holder, exactly as the law required, and after the held thing came home, the holder was not there any more. There was no act to point to. There was only a courtesy, perfectly performed, and a homeworld that had concluded. I have a guess. A Ledgerward cannot help but have a guess, and I will mark it as a guess so you do not carry it as a fact. I think the Hearth they returned was the true one, and the one we had revered was a shape, and I think the humans had held the true Hearth not as treasure and not as ransom but as a keeping, the way you keep a thing that should not be loose. Nothing is taken from the humans, not because the humans guard their things. Because the things the humans keep are kept for a reason, and the reason is that the things are not safe to hold, and the humans, in their tended quiet in their way houses at the edge of the margin, are the keepers the rest of the galaxy is grateful, without ever saying so, that someone agreed to be. We did not steal a treasure from a weak people. We took a keeping from the keepers and demanded by our own law that they return it to us, and they reviewed our law and they found it just and they kept it, and they gave us back the thing we had been spared from holding. The cradle of our flame, the origin of us, they gave it home. And the having of it, the full true weight of it that we had revered from a safe distance for the whole life of the Reach, came home to the homeworld, and the homeworld held it, and a people cannot hold the whole true weight of its own origin. No people can. That is why it is kept at the edge of the margin by someone else, by hands the oldest tellings do not name. We took the nomming into our own hands. We insisted. And the humans, who do not argue, who do not pursue, who do not take and therefore cannot be made to fight over a taking, simply agreed and returned what was ours, and let the weight of it do what weight does. That is a guess, hold it as a guess. Here is what is not a guess. We are what is left. 100-odd ships out of thousands, the rotations that happen to be elsewhere, the duty-bound and the dull and the far-flung, the quorum who were not home when home received what it had demanded. We do not go back. There is nothing to go back to that we could survive arriving at. The old Veilkin shipmaster lived long enough to make us swear it, and we have kept the swearing after her, hand closed. The gesture passed down our convoy now the way the flame was passed down the holdfasts once. We do not press claims. We keep no ledgers. I, who was a Ledgerward for 310 years, have not balanced an account since the homeworld concluded, and I will not, because the accounting was the disease, and a people in remission does not return to the thing that sickened it. And we tell the young, that is the only office I keep now. When the long dark gets into you and you need a voice older than the hull, you come to me, and you ask why we have no home, and I tell you, and the telling is the last useful thing the quorum make. Because there are other peoples in the arm, younger ones, prouder ones, peoples who keep ledgers of their own and have begun to wonder, the way we wondered, what sits unbalanced in the human margin, what is owed to them out past the hatched edge of the chart, what they might be strong enough to go and collect. They send their queries to the scattered peoples for old knowledge of human space, and when their queries reach our convoy, we answer them. We answer every one. We tell them what we are and what we did and what came home. We do not tell them not to go. We learned too late that a warning given as a forbidding only sharpens the pride that ignores it. So we do not forbid. We only do for.